What's going on, growers? It's James Prigioni coming to you live from Jersey. Today, me and Tucker are going to share with you the technique for transplanting that will change your life. Let's go! To follow this technique, first we have to prep our plants for transplanting. We do this with a process called hardening off. Now, this is one of the major mistakes that new gardeners make. They skip this step. This is something you do not want to skip. Hardening off is essentially just getting your plants that were inside or in a greenhouse acclimated to the outside temperature before actually putting them into the ground. To harden off my plants, what I like to do is about 1 to 2 weeks before transplanting, I'll start bringing my plants outside. So I'll pick a nice warm day the first time I bring them out, and I'll make sure that they're in a location that doesn't get direct sun and is protected from the wind. That first day I'll leave them outside for only about an hour or so, then I'll bring them back inside or in the greenhouse, and then as the days progress, I'll give them more time outside until these plants can stay outside for like a couple days. I'm talking like 24 hours at a time. After that, I'll know my plants are hardened off and ready to be transplanted into the garden. After my plants are properly hardened off, what I'll do is the day before I want to transplant them out, I'll make sure that I water them in, give them a nice good watering, so when I do go to transplant them the following day, the soil is nice and damp, not soggy and not too dried out, but perfectly damp. Now that my plants are ready to go into the ground, I try to pick a day to transplant where it's like cloudy or overcast, or even if it's drizzling out is good. What I don't want to do is pick a day where it's super sunny out and the sun is just beaming down on a hot day. That will stress my plants out. The idea is for the plants to go into the new home with the least amount of stress and to make a nice smooth transition. So if you do have to transplant on a hot day, just try to do it later in the evening. This way your plants have time to adjust before they have to wake up and deal with the sun. Next, I pick a location to plant in, and I make sure not to plant too densely. This is another common mistake that new gardeners make. To avoid this, what I like to do is use the square foot gardening method. By using this, it makes everything much simpler, because instead of trying to decide the spacing and where to plant in a whole entire bed, what you can do is just break everything down to 1 square foot section and then just go attack it like that, one at a time. In my opinion, it makes things much simpler. Now, I'm ready to start getting some plants into the ground, and what I want to avoid is any plants that are too root bound. For example, if there's a cabbage and it's starting to head up when it's still into the pot, I won't put that in the ground. Or when it comes to peppers, if they're starting to flower already, or they have small peppers on them when they're still in the pot, you don't want to transplant those because those won't produce well. They're already starting to focus on the production stage, and they should still be in that growth stage. That's when we want to put our plants into the ground. That's why sometimes planting things too early can be as big of a hassle than actually planting them too late. Let's get into the actual act of transplanting. So being good at transplanting, having good technique, has everything to do with knowing the crop you're going to put into the ground. For instance, when it comes to lettuce like this, I can plant this about 3 weeks before my last expected frost date, and it should still grow well. But if this was a tomato plant, I wouldn't want to plant this any earlier than 3 weeks after my last expected frost date. So knowing your plants, when to put them in, is going to help tremendously for your technique in transplanting. Here, this is where I'm going to be transplanting out my lettuce, and this variety is called Flashy Butter Gem. And this is a head lettuce. In our square foot gardening book, it tells us that we can put 2 head lettuces per square foot. So that's what we're going to do. So what I'm going to do is just dig a nice section here, bigger than the size of my transplant. I'm just going to loosen the soil on the sides, put it between my fingers just like that, the plant, and then just lightly just squeeze on it until it comes out. That's what we want to see. We want it to hold together like that, and it's not root bound. The roots are just starting to meet the center. Now what we're going to do is inoculate it a little with the mycorrhizal fungi. This is with mycos. This helps with transplant shock and all other aspects of growth. I'm now going to flip this over and just tuck it into its spot. I'm going to bury this at the same depth that it came out of the little pot. Then I'm going to go around and just press it around the soil gently. And we're going to do the same thing on the other one. Just going to dig in with our hand. We've built this soil so it's nice and soft, good stuff. Same thing, we're just going to flip it over, gently squeeze the sides, and then use our mycos. Drop it in, keeping it the same height that we planted it. Now we're just going to water this in. And that's how we plant our head lettuce, just like that. But if this was tomatoes, I would do things a bit different. So if this was tomatoes, like I said, I would wait till at least 3, maybe 4 weeks after my last expected frost date. And then when I bury my tomatoes in, I would bury the plants up to the first set of leaves. The reason I would do that is because tomatoes actually root from their stem. So you could plant up to the first set of leaves, or if you want, you could even turn your tomato sideways, plant it sideways, and then just leave the first set of leaves sticking up top like that. That will make it so you have even more roots, because tomatoes are a vine. So anything in the ground will produce more roots lead to more fruits. The lettuces are all tucked in, but I'm not finished yet. What I suggest you do if you're a new gardener especially is whenever you transplant into the garden, record in your notes the day you transplanted. This way in the future, you can reference that the following years and then count back of the perfect time to actually plant your seeds. Most new gardeners want to get their plants into the ground as soon as possible. They think that the earlier they get the plants in, that the bigger their harvest will be. But that's not always how it is, especially if you live in a location that gets a late frost. So if you do live in one of those spots and you want to plant out your stuff early, then I suggest you at least have a way to protect it. I'll plant my stuff out early sometimes, but I have my hinged hoop house, which I have either covered in plastic, or I could take that plastic off and cover it with something like a row cover to keep the frost off of it. That's one thing we want to do, is make sure we protect those plants if we get them out early. Another thing we have to think about is that our plants can only survive some of those frosts if they're well established and in the ground for a good period of time. For instance, if I had something like a cabbage plant, and if I planted that when it only had like maybe 2 true leaves, and the day that I planted it, that night it got down to about 32 degrees, that plant might die, because it's still getting adjusted to its new home and it's not well established. But if I had a well established cabbage plant with a bunch of leaves and stuff, and it had been sitting in the ground for 3 or 4 days already, and it had transitioned, then it would be fine in that frost event. So we want to make sure that our plants are well established, and we leave a few days for those plants to actually take the time to settle into their new homes. We don't want to plant them in and then all of a sudden that night it's 32 degrees. It's just too much stress. Just because we're finished transplanting doesn't mean we're done with this technique. Part of this technique has to do with understanding the inevitable. And one of the things of the inevitable is that the bugs and everything are going to come for your plants. For instance, once I get my cabbages in, my cauliflower, my broccoli, all my brassicas, it seems like the cabbage white butterfly just comes out of nowhere. What that thing will do is lay eggs on our plant, and then those will turn into cabbage worms. So we can either act like it's not happening, or we could try to be proactive. We could do something like getting an insect netting down. This way they can't even lay the eggs onto our plants. Use a form of protection like this. Or we could make sure we have something like BT, which is a spray to get rid of those cabbage worms. This won't hurt any other insects or anything, but it works really well to get rid of those cabbage worms. If you live in a hot climate, like one of the desert climates, then it's inevitable that it's going to get insanely hot. So just make sure that you have something like a 40% shade cloth. This way you can deal with that heat. So part of this technique for transplanting is understanding that those problems and those issues are going to arise, but being proactive on them and knowing that anything we can do to negate that is just going to make bigger harvests in the future. That's today's video, growers. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you got something out of it. Tuck has just been parading around a little bit, having some fun. It's a really nice day. That's why we wanted to wait a little later into the day to make this video, so we could actually do some transplanting, like we mentioned, in the evening when the sun's starting to set, just so it's a better transition. Before we let you go, me and Tuck wanted to let you know to hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, share with your friends. Don't forget to check out the merch down low, some of the spring merch. This is a limited time thing, so make sure you grab your merch, and also you make sure you grab your garden kneeler. Before we do let you go, look at this guy. Throw some hearts down in the comment and subscribe if you love seeing the boss in the videos, Tuck. He's just the best. But we also, me and Tuck, wanted to thank some of the new channel members. We wanted to thank Debbie Remsen for joining Team Grow. Thanks for being a part of it. Thanks for being a direct contributor and, being someone who makes all this happen. So it means a lot to me and the boss. We had fun out here, and we're going to be coming at you guys real soon with another one. James and Tuck, we